Hi guys. The purpose of this video, maybe two videos, basically in the last unit, in the Busy Bee unit, we talked a little bit about photosynthesis, but I want to get into a little bit more detail for things that you need to know about that process. The previous unit focused a lot on cellular respiration, but in all reality, photosynthesis is just as complex. Now, we're not going to dive into the detail that we did for respiration, but I would like to just kind of do an overview of photosynthesis and talk a little bit about some of the processes that occur during photosynthesis. So, photosynthesis is where autotrophs, basically organisms that can make their own food, use water and carbon dioxide to create glucose. Okay? And what this process does is transfers radiant energy from the sun into bond energy of glucose. And then we talked about it before, but most other organisms, most heterotrophs, are going to use this glucose and transfer that bond energy in glucose and make ATP. So photosynthesis is needed to do respiration. Okay? And actually, the same is true backwards as well. But the equation we already talked about. You take CO2, you take H2O, you get glucose, and you get oxygen. Okay, so carbon dioxide and water gives you glucose and oxygen. And you use light in here. The light energy is the energy that's going to be transformed from light energy into chemical bond energy. Okay, so this is the overall kind of summary of what photosynthesis does. Now we're going to get into a little bit more detail, though, about some of the different. So back to the equation part. You should probably fill that in. I forgot to mention that, but you have 6 CO2s plus 6 H2Os. You could write light if you want. Above that, give you glucose and oxygen. Okay. Now, on your paper, it also says photosynthesis is important to life because on Earth, most organisms use the glucose in order to produce ATP during respiration, okay? And this oxygen is also a very, very important byproduct because the oxygen is then what other organisms then use to help do respiration. So they use the glucose and the oxygen. And then these are the byproducts. So you can see that they're interchangeable, inverses of each other, and we talked about that last section. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about, let's see here, I want to talk a little, so, first of all, and you can see on your notes, the equation on your notes, we should probably write that in. So the equation, I want to talk a little bit about the ways that the plant gets the water and carbon dioxide that's needed. So the water actually comes from the roots. A lot of people think that the water comes from rain hitting leaves and it absorbs water, but the water itself actually comes from the ground, comes from the roots, and goes up tubes called xylem. Okay, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier in the year, but due to adhesion and cohesion, the water kind of just goes up and gets pulled up and goes right from the ground all the way up to the leaves and into the cells of the leaves, and then can be used for photosynthesis. Okay, so the water goes up through xylem. The carbon dioxide, though, that obviously comes from the air, and this picture here shows kind of the structure on how this carbon dioxide gets in. So within, this is a zoomed in picture with the microscope. You see these things right here. These are called stomatas or stomas. And basically a stoma is a little pore right here. And there's two cells on the outside called guard cells. That's what this is, and that's what this is. And the guard cells can either open or close. And if they open the stoma, what happens is the CO2 can come in. And this is where CO2 comes in, and it's also where oxygen goes out. Okay? So, but they can also close it. And they close it because the plant can actually lose some water through here as well, and sometimes the plant needs to conserve water. So if they close it, then the plant conserves water. So in the summertime, when plants are hot and starting to wilt, they basically close these, and then it can conserve more water. So the stomata or stoma are little pores, and you can kind of see this is a diagram that shows that. So this is how the CO2 enters and gets into that leaf in order to do photosynthesis. Okay, so obviously the water goes up to the xylem, the CO2 comes in through the stoma, and the guard cells can open or close. Basically the way they open or close, the vacuole that you can see here, basically like a big storage tank, when that is swollen and full of water, it forces it open. When that shrinks and loses water, it closes back up. Okay, so again, stomata, how CO2 gets in, water, how the water gets up to the leaves through xylem. Okay, so that's going to be it for this video. The next one that we're going to talk is going to talk a little bit about the different stages that are involved. Alright, hi guys. This video is going to cover the next 2 pages in your notes. The first video just kind of talked about what photosynthesis is, the equation, how water and CO2 get into the plant. This video is going to be just a very brief overview, kind of what happens, and there's 2 different parts to photosynthesis, so now we're going to look in a little bit more detail into what happens for each part. Not in the same detail we did for respiration, but we are going to look in a little bit of detail. There are some things that you should know. Okay, so we're at number 6 in the notes. The process of photosynthesis. First of all, photosynthesis occurs in an organelle called the chloroplast. This is kind of a picture of a chloroplast here. One thing that I want you to know: this is inside of cells. So this thing right here, this is an organelle which is found inside of plant cells. And these chloroplasts are actually the reason that plants are green, because they have a pigment, a green pigment in there that's actually responsible for photosynthesis, called chlorophyll. Okay, so called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, that's the green pigment. So that chlorophyll is located inside these things called the thylakoids. Okay, so it's kind of like, they look almost like springs here. Okay, so that's where chlorophyll is located, and that's where photosynthesis occurs. It actually occurs in 2 places. It occurs inside these thylakoids, and it occurs inside the space in here called the stroma. All right, we are going to talk about both of those phases, kind of what happens in the thylakoids and what happens in the stroma. Okay, so you can see for number 6 in your notes, letter A, light reactions occur in the thylakoids where chlorophyll is found. We'll talk about that in a second. Chlorophyll is the green pigment. We just talked about that. Through photosynthesis, captured light energy is transformed into chemical bond energy and stored in the bonds of glucose. So that's what this whole process does. And then organisms then use the glucose for respiration. So that's what we talked about last unit. And you can kind of see in your picture there, your picture in the notes is a little bit different than mine, but you can see that you have this thylakoid there, and stroma is kind of the space in there. Okay. Now, photosynthesis occurs in 2 main steps. The first is called the light-dependent reactions, or light reactions, and the reason that it's called that is because this is where light is actually used. Okay, so light-dependent or light reactions, and basically in your notes, 8A, underline this occurs in the thylakoid. Okay. B, these require light. That's why they're called light dependent. They depend on the light. And basically, this is where water is used. So in the light dependent reactions, you can kind of see here in the video The water comes in, and the light energy here splits this water into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is given off. This is the oxygen that's given off during the whole process. So the oxygen just leaves them, and you're left with a bunch of hydrogens. And the light, and we're not going to get into in great detail, but the light also is used to make ATP. Okay, this ATP is going to be used later, and these hydrogens are going to be used later. Now, one of the things that I do want you to know, the hydrogens that come off here, that get split from the water, okay, they get picked up by a molecule called NADP. So similar to NAD, but just you add a phosphate on there, and it becomes NADPH. Okay, so the hydrogen get picked up by NADP, and you release the oxygen, and ATP is made as well. And then what's going to happen is the hydrogen and the ATP, the hydrogen that are on this NADPH, and the ATP, they're going to go into the next set of reactions called the light-independent reactions. So, you can see on your notes, it says the light energy is captured by change that glucose to chlorophyll, and is used to split the water molecules in the hydrogen and oxygen. This process is called photolysis. I'd underline that. And the oxygen that's produced is given off as a byproduct. The hydrogen get picked up by NADP and taken to the next set of reactions. We just talked about that. And during the process, some light energy is also used to create ATP. And the ATP and the hydrogen on the NADPH are then used for the dark reactions or light independent. Okay, so I'd probably write independent there as well. So basically what the light-dependent reactions do, they use light and the water and basically split the water so you get a bunch of hydrogens and you get some ATPs. And the hydrogens and ATPs are going to do the next set of reactions called the light-independent reactions or the dark reactions. Okay, I'm going to stop this video here. Actually, I'm going to create one more video. So please stay tuned for the light-independent reactions and then just kind of tying everything together. Thanks.